What happens when your mind believes two opposite things at the same time? You pride yourself on being honest. You believe deeply in doing the right thing. But then one day you lie to protect someone you care about. Not a huge lie, but still, it gnaws at you. On one hand, you still believe you're an honest person. On the other, you know what you did is wrong. That tension, that uncomfortable feeling tugging at your chest, that's cognitive dissonance. It's what happens when your actions and your beliefs no longer align. It doesn't just make you feel conflicted, it creates a mental discomfort that the brain desperately wants to resolve. So what do we do when that happens? We rationalize. We twist things. We tell ourselves stories to close the gap. I had no choice. They wouldn't have understood the truth anyway. It was for their own good. The lie remains, but now it sits more comfortably next to our values. This is the mind protecting itself. The term cognitive dissonance was coined in 1957 by Leon Festinger, an American social psychologist. Festinger's classic experiment illustrates this well. Participants were asked to complete a boring task and then lie to the next participant, saying it was enjoyable. Some were paid $20 to lie, others just $1. Strangely, those paid only $1 were more likely to convince themselves that the task was actually fun. Why? Because $1 wasn't enough justification to lie, so they adjusted their belief to reduce the discomfort. Maybe it wasn't that bad. That's dissonance at work. When the external reward is low, the internal belief changes to match the behavior. But cognitive dissonance doesn't only come from moral slip-ups, it shows up in relationships, careers, politics, and self-image. Think of someone in a toxic relationship. They believe they deserve love and respect, but their partner belittles them, lies, cheats. Staying in that relationship forces the brain into a double bind. I'm worth love, and I'm being treated like I'm worthless. That contradiction is unbearable. So they tell themselves, they didn't mean it. They're just stressed. It's my fault. I push people away. In a strange way, it's easier to believe a lie that preserves our worldview than to confront a truth that shatters it. That's the danger of dissonance. We don't always resolve it by facing the truth. We often resolve it by changing the narrative. This is why people stay in bad jobs, defend cruel ideologies, or protect abusers. It's not because they're blind. It's because their mind is trying to protect them from a truth too painful to face. And here's where it gets even darker. Manipulators know this. When someone constantly feeds you information that contradicts what you know to be true, slowly, subtly, you begin to question yourself. You start adjusting your beliefs to relieve the pressure. This is how gaslighting ties into cognitive dissonance. If someone repeatedly tells you that you're overreacting, too emotional, or flat out wrong, your brain tries to make sense of it. You believe you're reasonable, but the feedback you're getting tells you otherwise. Over time, that dissonance becomes unbearable. Something has to give, and often it's your own confidence. You think, maybe I do overthink things. Maybe they're right, and I'm too sensitive. Maybe I am hard to love. Cognitive dissonance doesn't just make you feel uncomfortable. It reshapes your sense of self if left unchecked. The scariest part? You won't always notice it's happening. It doesn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It's a slow leak, a drip of self-doubt here, a crack in your certainty there. Until one day, you no longer trust your own instincts. And once that happens, someone else can easily step in and fill that vacuum with their version of reality. The bystander effect. Imagine you're walking down the street and witness someone suddenly collapse. You look around, expecting someone to rush to their aid, but everyone around you just keeps walking by, seemingly unaffected. You might hesitate too, thinking someone else will step in, but the longer the wait, the harder it becomes to act. You're not alone in this feeling. This is an example of the bystander effect, a social psychological phenomenon where people are less likely to help a victim when other people are present. The bystander effect shows how group dynamics can influence individual behavior, often leading to inaction. It's counterintuitive, as one would assume that more people would mean more help. But in fact, the opposite happens. The more witnesses there are, the less likely anyone is to intervene. This is because of two primary factors: diffusion of responsibility and social influence. Diffusion of responsibility occurs when individuals in a group feel that the responsibility to act is shared among everyone else. In a situation where help is needed, people might feel that someone else will step up, leaving them off the hook. This often leads to a standoff, where no one takes action. In a crowd, this responsibility is spread thin, and no one feels personally compelled to intervene. For example, if a person sees someone in distress in a busy street, they might think, "Someone else will surely help. I don't need to be the one." This mental shift paralyzes potential helpers, creating an atmosphere of collective indifference. Social influence, the second factor, is just as powerful. It involves looking to others to guide how we should behave in uncertain situations. When no one else is helping, individuals often mirror the behavior of others around them. If other bystanders are doing nothing, people assume that the situation isn't as urgent as it might seem. As humans, we tend to follow social cues. If the crowd is not reacting, we interpret that as permission to stay passive. The presence of others becomes a cue to do nothing, reinforcing the idea that help is unnecessary or unwelcome. This creates a dangerous cycle where the more people present, the less likely someone is to take action. The bystander effect is not just limited to street-level emergencies. It has been observed in more complex scenarios as well. In large-scale events like workplace accidents or even disasters like natural calamities, people may stand back, assuming someone else is more qualified or responsible to act. Even when people feel empathy, they often remain passive, believing that their intervention is not needed. A well-known study conducted by psychologists John Darley and Bibb Latagne in 1968 highlighted this phenomenon. Participants were placed in situations where they were led to believe that another person needed help, such as during a conversation over a phone. In some cases, the person needing help appeared to be in distress. When participants were alone, they were much more likely to help. However, when others were present, the likelihood of someone offering help dropped dramatically. This study confirmed that people are less likely to take action when they think someone else will. But there's hope. Understanding the bystander effect is the first step to overcoming it. When we become aware of these psychological influences, we can break free from them. One way to combat the bystander effect is by making the situation more personal. If someone is in need, directly looking at them and making a conscious decision to act can override the social paralysis caused by the crowd. Alternatively, it's important to avoid assuming someone else will take care of things. If you see a situation where help is needed, make it clear that you are the one who is stepping up. Projective identification. There's a way to control someone's thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without using any force, threats, or overt commands. No yelling, no manipulation, no outward aggression. The technique is far more subtle, and often, the person being controlled doesn't even realize it's happening. It's called projective identification, and it can twist someone's sense of self to the point where they act out emotions that aren't their own, believing them to be. In simple terms, projective identification is when someone unconsciously projects their own undesirable feelings or traits onto another person. However, it's not just about placing blame or labeling someone. The real kicker is that the manipulator then induces the victim to actually experience those feelings, causing them to react as though the projected emotions are their own. The person being manipulated doesn't know they are being influenced. They feel like they are choosing their reactions freely, but in reality, they are being subtly controlled. Think about it. Have you ever found yourself angry, upset, or defensive, but not really sure why? Maybe someone you trusted made you feel inferior without directly saying it, or they might have triggered an emotional reaction in you that seemed to come out of nowhere. That's projective identification in action. The process starts subtly. The manipulator might project their own feelings of guilt, insecurity, or anger onto the victim. Let's say a person feels inadequate, but doesn't want to deal with that emotion. Instead of confronting it, they push those feelings onto someone else. They might make a passive-aggressive comment, like, "I guess I just don't matter to you," or "You don't care about me the way I care about you." These comments don't directly accuse the victim of anything, yet they plant a seed that begins to grow in the victim's mind. The victim starts to feel responsible for the manipulator's emotions, which weren't theirs to begin with. This trick is most effective when the victim starts internalizing those feelings. They might begin to believe that something is wrong with them, something that they need to fix in order to make the manipulator happy. In turn, the victim might behave in ways that reinforce the manipulator's expectations, often without realizing it. For instance, the victim might apologize or act overly accommodating, trying to fix their own perceived shortcomings, even though the entire situation was based on the manipulator's projections. Once the victim has internalized the projected feelings, they stop questioning them. They don't see the manipulation. They just think they're being a good friend, partner, or colleague. What's happening behind the scenes is far more insidious. The victim has been trained to believe that the manipulator's reality is their own. Over time, this constant manipulation can break down a person's sense of self, making them constantly second-guess their decisions and actions, seeking approval from someone who will never be satisfied. Here's the twist, though. Projective identification isn't just about the manipulator's influence over the victim. The victim can also begin to project their own feelings onto themselves. Over time, as the manipulator continues to shift the victim's emotional state, the victim may internalize these projections as part of their own personality. They start to shame themselves for having the emotions that were originally placed on them. For example, someone who is made to feel guilty for no reason might eventually start to feel like a bad person simply for expressing their needs. The emotional manipulation becomes so ingrained that the victim no longer needs the manipulator to control them. They've started controlling themselves. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is one of the most insidious forms of psychological manipulation. It doesn't involve brute force or direct confrontation. Instead, it's a slow and steady distortion of someone's reality, so subtle that they may not even realize it's happening. The victim begins to doubt their own perceptions, memory, and sanity. It's a mind game that often leaves the person questioning their own judgment, thinking they might be overreacting or imagining things. The term gaslighting originates from the 1938 play Gaslight, where a husband manipulates his wife into thinking she's losing her mind. He does this by subtly dimming the gas lights in their home and insisting that she's imagining the changes. Over time, she begins to believe she is indeed crazy. This simple act of manipulation illustrates the very essence of gaslighting, convincing someone that their reality is wrong and theirs alone to question. But how does gaslighting unfold in everyday life? It starts with small distortions. A gaslighter will deny things that have happened, even when you're sure they did. They may tell you that you're remembering things wrong or that you're too sensitive about something. The goal is to undermine your confidence in your own experiences. These lies are often so convincing that you begin to question your own memory. Did I really say that? Or maybe I did overreact, become common thoughts in the mind of the victim. As the manipulation deepens, the gaslighter escalates their tactics. They may use contradictions, or make the victim feel guilty for expressing their concerns. The gaslighter might say things like, "You're just making things up again," or "You're imagining things." When you start doubting your own perception, the gaslighter has gained control. You may even begin to feel like you're the one to blame for the tension in the relationship, thinking that you're causing the problem by being too emotional or irrational. The real danger of gaslighting is that it wears you down over time. It doesn't come in a single overwhelming event. Instead, it's a series of small, incremental changes that shift your reality just enough to make you feel unbalanced. A gaslighter makes their victim feel like they're losing their mind, and that's what keeps the victim trapped. The emotional abuse isn't always obvious, and the manipulation is often disguised as concern or love. The gaslighter might feign innocence and tell you, "I'm just trying to help," but behind the scenes, they're working to erode your confidence in yourself. Another hallmark of gaslighting is isolation. The manipulator may subtly suggest that no one else understands or supports you, further reinforcing their control over your thoughts. When you begin to feel alienated from others, questioning your perception of reality becomes easier. You may even stop seeking support from friends or family, thinking they might not believe you or that you're truly the one who's wrong. But how do you escape gaslighting when you're so deep in it? The first step is recognizing that it's happening. If someone consistently makes you feel like you're the problem, makes you question your memories, or isolates you from your support network, it's a red flag. The second step is to trust your instincts. If something feels off or you feel like you're constantly defending your reality, listen to those feelings. Write things down. Keep records of events as they happen so you can refer back to them when you feel confused. Learned helplessness. Imagine being in a situation where no matter how hard you try, nothing seems to work out. You make the effort, but the results remain the same. Failure or disappointment. Over time, you begin to believe that nothing you do will ever make a difference. You feel stuck, unable to change your circumstances, and no longer motivated to try. This is learned helplessness, a psychological phenomenon where repeated exposure to uncontrollable or negative situations leads to a sense of powerlessness. Learned helplessness was first demonstrated in a series of experiments by psychologists Martin Seligman and Stephen Meyer in the 1960s. In their studies, dogs were subjected to electric shocks that they could not escape. Eventually, the dogs stopped trying to avoid the shocks, even when escape was possible. The dogs had learned that their actions had no control over the situation, and this belief generalized to other situations, causing them to act helpless even when they could avoid pain. The same principle applies to humans. When people experience repeated failure or face situations beyond their control, they begin to internalize the belief that they are powerless. This often occurs in environments where individuals face continuous setbacks, such as struggling in school, being in an abusive relationship, or dealing with chronic health problems. Over time, these individuals stop putting in effort because they believe their actions won't make a difference. They feel trapped, as though no matter how hard they try, they will always end up failing. For example, a student who consistently receives poor grades, no matter how much they study, might begin to believe that their efforts are futile. This feeling of helplessness leads to a lack of motivation to improve. They stop studying, believing that no amount of effort will change the outcome. Similarly, in an abusive relationship, the victim might feel like nothing they do will ever make the partner stop the abuse. This belief in their inability to change the situation can lead to emotional numbness, making it even harder to break free. The impact of learned helplessness goes beyond the immediate situation. It affects an individual's overall mindset, creating a cycle of despair. The person stops trying not only in the specific area where they've experienced failure, but in other aspects of their life as well. This can lead to depression, anxiety, and a sense of hopelessness. In extreme cases, learned helplessness can even affect a person's physical health, as the lack of effort can lead to neglecting one's well-being. However, there is hope. The first step in overcoming learned helplessness is recognizing that the belief in powerlessness is learned, not inherent. It's important to understand that just because past efforts didn't work doesn't mean future efforts won't either. The key to breaking the cycle is to regain control, starting with small, manageable goals. Success in even the smallest tasks can begin to rebuild confidence and break the belief that nothing can change. Identity fusion. In today's world, people often find themselves deeply attached to a group or cause. Whether it's political, religious, or social, these affiliations can shape how we see ourselves and the world. But what happens when your identity becomes so fused with a group that your self-worth is entirely dependent on it? This is the phenomenon of identity fusion, and it's more common and more dangerous than most realize. Identity fusion occurs when a person's sense of self is no longer independent of their group identity. It's not just about joining a cause, it's about becoming that cause. You stop seeing yourself as an individual with your own thoughts and beliefs, and instead you see yourself as an extension of the group. In extreme cases, people will go to incredible lengths, even sacrificing their own well-being or moral compass, to protect or promote the group they identify with. One of the most striking examples of identity fusion can be seen in political movements. Think about the extreme ideologies that have led to violence throughout history. When a person becomes so fused with an ideology, whether it's left-wing, right-wing, or anything in between, the cause becomes their entire identity. They don't just believe in their political stance, they are their political stance. This deep fusion can make them feel invincible in defending the cause, even at the expense of personal relationships, ethics, or basic logic. The power of identity fusion is that it operates at a subconscious level. People who are fused with a group or cause often don't recognize how far they've strayed from their own individual beliefs. They justify extreme actions because their identity is wrapped up in the success of the group. The us versus them mentality becomes second nature, and anyone who threatens the group is seen as a direct attack on their very being. This makes it nearly impossible to separate the cause from the person. And it's not just extreme politics. Religious groups can see similar effects, with members being so emotionally tied to their beliefs that they no longer question their practices or leadership. This blind loyalty can lead to personal harm, emotional distress, and even acts of violence, all in the name of preserving the identity of the group. Why does identity fusion happen? It often begins with a deep sense of belonging. People join groups in search of purpose, validation, and community. However, over time, this need for belonging can evolve into an all-consuming connection. The group provides answers, meaning, and direction, so the individual begins to surrender their sense of self for the larger cause. The danger lies in the fact that once identity fusion occurs, it's incredibly difficult to reverse. People can become so entrenched in their group that they stop questioning their beliefs or behaviors. Any challenge to the group feels like a personal attack, leading to defensive or even destructive actions. How to break free? The first step is self-awareness. Recognize when your group affiliations are overshadowing your individual beliefs. It's important to take a step back and assess whether your group identity is genuinely in line with your personal values. Second, engage in critical thinking. If your group demands unquestioning loyalty, that's a sign to ask deeper questions. Don't allow your beliefs to be dictated by others without challenge. Finally, remember your individuality. Your worth doesn't depend on any group or cause. A healthy sense of self is rooted in your own experiences, values, and choices, not in blind allegiance to something larger than yourself. Only then can you truly break free from the grip of identity fusion. Victim mentality. You ever notice how when one bad thing happens, it feels like the whole world starts falling apart? Like you stub your toe and suddenly everything goes wrong. You start to see yourself as the victim of life's cruel game where everything's stacked against you. You can't catch a break and the universe just seems to have it out for you. It's not some grand cosmic conspiracy. It's your mind feeding you the illusion that life is working against you. And once that narrative takes hold, it can stick like glue. This is what is called the victim mentality trap. Once you slip into the victim role, your brain starts filtering the world through a lens of helplessness. It's not that life's challenges are any bigger than before, but suddenly, your mind is wired to see everything as an attack, a burden, or some form of injustice. You're constantly looking for the next reason to feel wronged. And before you know it, it feels like the universe is conspiring against you. But here's the truth. It's not reality. It's just your mind running wild with the narrative you've fed it. It's a dangerous loop. And the worst part is, it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like survival. You might not even realize you're stuck in this cycle. You complain about your job, your relationships, your circumstances, always pointing out how unfair everything is. The more you focus on what's wrong, the more your brain locks onto it. Everything starts feeling like an uphill battle, and the people around you just don't get it. But you've been conditioned to see the world through that lens. And that's what makes it so insidious. Here's where the real harm lies. When you start identifying as the victim, you give up your power. You stop taking responsibility for your actions, your choices, and your own happiness. Instead, you start waiting for someone else to fix things, to rescue you from your misery. It's a passive state that keeps you stuck, spinning your wheels in a perpetual cycle of frustration. You become dependent on others to make things better, but what you're really doing is handing over control of your life. This mentality doesn't just hurt you, it hurts your relationships too. When you play the victim, you can't see the other side of the story. You get trapped in a constant narrative of, I'm the one being wronged, and that blocks empathy, growth, and understanding. It's easy to push people away when all you do is point fingers, blaming others for your unhappiness. Here's the cold truth. No one else is going to break you out of this cycle. You're the only one who can reframe your story. The next time you catch yourself thinking, why does this always happen to me? Take a step back. Ask yourself, am I seeing the bigger picture? What can I control here? What's my role in this situation? The shift won't happen overnight, but with time, you can rewire your brain to stop playing the victim. And when you do, you'll realize that the world isn't out to get you. It's simply there, waiting for you to step up and take responsibility for your own life. So next time you feel like the world's working against you, pause. Challenge that story. Is it reality, or is it just a pattern your mind's locked you into? Mimetic desire. Ever notice how much you crave something after seeing it everywhere? You walk into a room and suddenly everyone seems to be talking about this one new phone or that one fashion brand. Before you know it, you're scouring websites, convinced you need it. You might think the desire is yours, something you've independently chosen. But what if it isn't? What if your craving is merely the result of seeing others desire the same thing? That's mimetic desire in action. A force so subtle, yet powerful, it shapes your choices without you ever noticing it. Mimetic desire isn't about your personal preferences. It's the urge to want something because others want it. It's rooted in imitation, a social phenomenon where our desires are shaped not by our own instincts, but by the desires of those around us. This is the essence of mimetic theory, a concept popularized by philosopher René Girard. He argued that we don't just imitate behaviors, we imitate desires. What you want, what you crave, and what you think you need often come from observing others. Whether it's the latest trends, lifestyle aspirations, or even status symbols. Take social media, for example. You scroll through your feed and see a friend post about a vacation in a luxury resort. You might not have had any desire to go on a beach holiday before, but now it feels like something you can't live without. The desire to travel isn't sparked by your own inner longing. It's sparked by the image of someone else living that life. The image isn't just about the location, it's about the feeling that comes with it. Success, freedom, achievement. And as you keep seeing it, you begin to want it too. This is mimetic desire at its core. It's not just the direct imitation of the object of desire, but the deeper, often unconscious desire to align yourself with the social group that has it. This is why trends spread like wildfire. Whether it's a new gadget, a lifestyle, or a belief, once a few people in your circle express their desire for something, that desire starts to spread. It creates a ripple effect. You see it, you want it, but do you need it? Here's where it gets tricky. Mimetic desire can trap you into chasing something that isn't even yours to begin with. It's not about what will truly bring you fulfillment. It's about maintaining social alignment. You see, the real power of mimetic desire lies in the social feedback loop. The more people desire something, the more you feel pressured to want it too. Not because you've independently chosen it, but because you fear being left out of the social fabric. And once you get caught in the cycle, it becomes a race. Everyone's scrambling to get the next big thing, chasing validation rather than satisfaction. Marketers understand this. They use mimetic desire to create products that people can't wait to buy, not because they genuinely need them, but because everyone else is buying them. They craft campaigns that tap into your social sense, showing you how many people are already jumping on board. The moment you see others validating something, your brain begins to internalize the idea that this is something you should want too. It's not about the object, it's about being a part of the in-group. So, the next time you catch yourself wanting something, ask yourself, is this truly something I desire, or is it just a reflection of someone else's desire I've adopted as my own? Compassion fatigue. It starts with small moments. You listen to someone's pain. You offer advice or you hold space for them. It feels good to be there for others, to be a beacon of hope and support. But then, over time, the stories keep coming. The trauma, the heartbreak, the struggles, it all piles up, layer after layer. At first, you're strong. You have the energy to keep giving, to keep caring. But then something shifts. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to feel drained. The once vibrant compassion you had starts to flicker. You're tired, and it feels like it's not just physical exhaustion. It's something deeper, a mental and emotional fatigue you can't shake off. This is compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is a form of burnout that affects those who are in caregiving or supportive roles, especially people who are exposed to chronic stress or emotional trauma from others. It's the cost of constantly empathizing, listening, and caring for others without taking time to replenish your own reserves. It can hit anyone who consistently puts their own emotions aside to help others. Nurses, therapists, social workers, or even friends and family members who always seem to carry the emotional weight of others. At first, it doesn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. You care because you want to. You're empathetic because it feels natural to respond to someone else's pain. But over time, this repeated exposure to suffering, coupled with your own personal stressors, takes its toll. You start to feel detached, numb. The stories you once felt deeply are now just stories. You can no longer connect to the pain because your own emotional resources are stretched thin. What happens here is not a loss of empathy, it's a protective mechanism. When you're exposed to constant emotional demands, your mind and body instinctively begin to shut down to protect you. You stop feeling the same level of empathy because your brain recognizes that if you keep going, you'll break. This emotional numbing is a natural defense, but it comes with a cost. Your ability to effectively help others starts to diminish. You feel less motivated, less patient, and sometimes downright cynical. You've become disconnected from your own emotional needs, and in doing so, you've become disconnected from others. This doesn't happen overnight. Compassion fatigue builds quietly, like a slow burn. It starts with small signs: irritability, feeling overwhelmed, lack of motivation. But these symptoms often go unnoticed. You're too busy putting others first to notice that you're starting to lose touch with your own self-care. And when the fatigue reaches its peak, you find yourself asking, why does it feel so hard to care anymore? The worst part about compassion fatigue is that it sneaks up on you. There's no clear moment when you realize you've crossed the line from being a compassionate helper to someone who's running on empty. And by the time you're fully aware, you may be too worn out to do anything about it. So what's the solution? The first step is recognizing that it's okay to take a step back. Caring for others is important, but it's just as important to care for yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup. Rest, reflection, and boundaries aren't luxuries, they're necessities. Because if you keep giving without replenishing, you'll burn out. And when that happens, you won't just be unable to help others, you might lose the ability to help yourself. Compassion fatigue doesn't happen because you're weak. It happens because you've been too strong for too long. The real question is, when will you stop to refill your cup before it runs dry? False memory. You believe you remember something. It's vivid in your mind, the details sharp, the emotions real. But what if your memory is a lie? What if the brain isn't just recalling the past, but rewriting it? False memories are not just the stuff of fiction. They're a powerful brain trick that can shape your reality in ways you'd never suspect. At the heart of this deception is the brain's natural ability to construct memories. Unlike a camera, which captures events with precision, the brain weaves memories together, mixing sensory input with emotional responses. This process is usually accurate, but it's far from flawless. In fact, the brain's reconstructive nature means that memories are highly susceptible to distortion. One of the most insidious ways this happens is through suggestion. The mere planting of an idea can cause the brain to remember events that never occurred. Psychologists call this the misinformation effect. Ask someone to recall a specific detail, like the color of a car in an accident they witnessed, and they'll often remember it differently after being exposed to misleading information. It's not lying. It's the brain genuinely altering its own narrative. False memories aren't limited to subtle suggestions either. Trauma can play a role, creating distorted recollections of past events. In these cases, the brain doesn't just fill in gaps with inaccurate details, it fabricates entire experiences, often as a defense mechanism. The mind tries to protect itself from emotional pain by altering memories, even creating events that didn't happen, just to make the trauma easier to bear. But it doesn't stop there. False memories can be manipulated by external forces, from advertising to media to even therapy. In some notorious cases, therapists have inadvertently implanted false memories of abuse, leading people to believe in events that never took place. The power of suggestion, combined with the brain's propensity to fill in gaps, can create elaborate, believable scenarios that feel real, but are nothing more than an illusion. This is where things get dangerous. False memories can affect decisions, relationships, and even legal outcomes. Innocent people have been convicted based on false memories planted during interrogations or court testimonies. And the worst part? They're convinced they're telling the truth. The brain doesn't distinguish between what happened and what was suggested. It treats them both as reality. So how do you protect yourself from false memories? Awareness is key. Question your recollections, especially when they seem too vivid or too perfect. Don't take them as gospel. And if you're in a situation where your memory could be influenced, whether through media, social pressures, or emotional distress, recognize that the brain isn't an infallible recorder of events. It's a storyteller. And sometimes it tells a story that isn't true. Psychosomatic illness. Imagine waking up with a headache, sore muscles, or even stomach pain. It feels real, right? You might reach for painkillers or call in sick, expecting the discomfort to vanish. But what if I told you that your mind, not your body, was the culprit? That's the phenomenon behind psychosomatic illness. Physical symptoms that arise not from an illness, but from the mind's influence over the body. Here's where things get tricky. The symptoms are real. They hurt. They affect your daily life, but they have no identifiable physical cause. This isn't all in your head in the dismissive sense. It's an intricate and powerful interaction between mind and body, where stress, anxiety, or trauma manifest as physical ailments. The brain doesn't just think, it feels, and sometimes those feelings manifest as pain. It all starts in the brain. When we experience extreme stress, anxiety, or even unresolved emotional conflicts, the brain sends signals to the body that trigger real physical reactions. This could be anything from a racing heartbeat, sweaty palms, or a tight chest, to more severe symptoms like chronic pain, dizziness, or digestive issues. The mind creates a physiological response which the body experiences as an ailment, but there's no underlying disease causing it. But how does this happen? The body is designed to respond to stress. It triggers the release of cortisol, a hormone that helps you respond to danger. However, in the modern world, our stress is often chronic. Job pressures, relationship troubles, financial strain, leaving our stress systems perpetually on high alert. Over time, this constant state of arousal can lead to physical ailments like tension headaches or even irritable bowel syndrome. The mind's response to emotional stress becomes so intense that it affects the body's systems, even though there's no physical cause. Psychosomatic illness doesn't just manifest in response to stress. It can also be a reflection of deep, unresolved trauma. Sometimes painful memories or emotions are too overwhelming for the conscious mind, so the body steps in, taking on the burden. For example, a person who experienced childhood trauma might develop chronic back pain in adulthood as their mind tries to carry the weight of their past. The body becomes a vessel for emotions too heavy to bear. So, how do you break the cycle? Awareness is key. Recognize when your body's symptoms may be rooted in stress or emotional conflict rather than illness. Techniques like mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, and even physical activity can help shift the mind's influence on the body. It's a delicate balance, but the first step is acknowledging that the mind has the power to shape your physical health. And once you realize that, you can begin to take back control. Savior complex. You constantly feel the need to save someone. Whether it's a friend, a partner, or even a stranger, you step in to fix their problems, believing that without you, they'll fall apart. This is the savior complex, a psychological pattern where someone feels compelled to rescue others, often driven by the belief that they are the only ones who can make a difference. The savior feels important, even necessary, by fixing others' lives, but this dynamic comes with a darker side. Here's the twist. The savior complex is rarely about genuine selflessness. It's about validation. When you feel needed, it bolsters your sense of worth. You don't just help because you want to. You help because your identity is tied to being the one who rescues. Over time, this can morph into a dependency dynamic, where the person being saved becomes less empowered to handle their own problems. Instead of fostering independence, the savior complex feeds into a cycle of reliance. And here's where it gets even trickier. The savior doesn't necessarily want to be needed forever. But by constantly stepping in, they create a relationship where their assistance is expected. making it difficult for the other person to ever stand on their own. This might seem innocent at first, just trying to help a friend or loved one in need, but it often leads to resentment. The savior starts feeling exhausted, unappreciated, and emotionally drained by the constant need to fix everything, while the person being helped never grows into a more self-sufficient individual. The savior complex can be subtly manipulated too. A toxic person might feed into your need to help, making sure they're always in crisis, which keeps you hooked. They know that as long as you feel like you're fixing them, you'll stay emotionally invested. It's a manipulation tactic, not just an act of kindness. The person with the savior complex often doesn't realize that their need to help can be just as damaging as the behavior they're trying to fix. So, how do you break the cycle? The first step is recognizing the pattern. You're not a hero simply because you step in to solve someone else's problems. True strength comes in empowering others to stand on their own 2 feet, not keeping them in a state of perpetual dependence. Until you recognize this dynamic, you'll keep reinforcing the cycle, believing you're doing good while undermining both your own well-being and the growth of the person you're trying to save. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Have you ever been convinced you were going to fail, only to find that your performance matched your fear? Or perhaps you believed you would succeed, and somehow everything seemed to fall into place? This isn't just coincidence. It's the phenomenon known as the self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's a force that shapes your reality, often without you even realizing it. Let's break it down. A self-fulfilling prophecy occurs when your beliefs or expectations about a situation lead you to behave in ways that cause those very expectations to come true. Imagine you walk into a job interview, convinced you won't get the position. Because of that belief, you might come across as nervous or unenthusiastic, which lowers your chances of landing the job. Your fear of failure led to actions that resulted in exactly what you feared. This psychological trap is insidious because it doesn't require anyone else to intervene. It operates solely within your mind. The more you believe something, the more your behavior aligns with that belief. The result? Your actions make your expectations a reality. This is why people who expect to fail often do, and people who expect to succeed often find success. But the power of the self-fulfilling prophecy doesn't just work in personal situations. It can also affect your interactions with others. Consider how a teacher's expectations can shape a student's performance. If a teacher believes certain students are high achievers and others are underperformers, their treatment of these students will shift accordingly. The high achievers will receive more attention, praise, and encouragement, while the underperformers may be overlooked. This subtle bias can set up the students for success or failure, fulfilling the teacher's initial expectations. What's even more dangerous is when these prophecies are based on stereotypes. If society expects certain groups to succeed and others to fail, it shapes the opportunities and resources available to them, reinforcing those very expectations. This creates a cycle that is hard to break, as each person's behavior aligns with society's predictions. Here's the key. The self-fulfilling prophecy isn't just about believing in success or failure. It's about recognizing how powerful expectations are in shaping outcomes. By changing what you expect, you can change how you behave, and ultimately, how the world responds to you. If you want to break the cycle of negative expectations, it starts with challenging what you believe to be true about yourself and others. The real question isn't whether you'll succeed or fail. It's what kind of prophecy you're choosing to fulfill. Sunk cost fallacy. It starts with a simple thought. I've already invested so much. I can't just walk away now. That's the sunk cost fallacy, an irrational psychological trap where we continue investing in something, whether it's time, money, or effort, because we've already committed, even when it's clear that continuing will only lead to more loss. Think about a person watching a movie they're not enjoying. Halfway through, they realize they've spent an hour of their life that they'll never get back. But instead of leaving, they stay. Why? Because they've already spent that time, and the thought of walking out feels like wasting it. The movie might be bad, but the idea of abandoning their investment makes it feel like they'd lose twice. Once by not finishing, and again by admitting the time was wasted. So they stay, letting the wasted time compound into even more wasted time. The sunk cost fallacy works the same way in business. Companies keep pouring money into failing projects because they've already spent so much on them. Instead of cutting their losses, they keep going, hoping that further investment will somehow turn things around. It's the reasoning behind why many businesses keep old, ineffective products on the market, or why individuals stay in toxic relationships. The more you've invested, the harder it becomes to admit that it's time to move on. And here's the dangerous part. The sunk cost fallacy doesn't just affect individuals, it affects entire systems. Take the example of the 1986 Challenger space shuttle disaster. Engineers and administrators knew there were serious risks, but the investment in the mission was so large, both in terms of money and effort, that they chose to proceed anyway. Tragically, the result was catastrophic. The sunk cost fallacy prevented clear decision-making, prioritizing past investments over future safety. So why does it happen? The fallacy plays into our innate desire for consistency. Once we've committed to a path, the brain wants to justify that choice. It creates a cognitive bias where walking away feels like admitting failure. But continuing, even when it's clear we're on the wrong path, feels safer. It's easier to keep going than to confront the discomfort of letting go. The real problem with the sunk cost fallacy is that it prevents rational decision-making. It traps you in a cycle where you keep feeding more into a situation that's already failed. The key to breaking free is recognizing that past investments are gone. They're sunk. The only thing that matters is what you do next. The sooner you realize that continuing to invest in something already lost only prolongs the loss, the sooner you can redirect your efforts toward something that actually brings value. Trauma bonding. Sometimes it's the ones who hurt you the most that you can't seem to shake. Why do you keep going back? What keeps you stuck? It's an unsettling question, one that many victims of emotional abuse ask themselves after experiencing cycles of hurt and reconciliation. This is the grim power of trauma bonding, the psychological glue that ties people to their abusers, often for far longer than is healthy or logical. Trauma bonding happens when the pain of abuse becomes intertwined with the moments of affection or care, creating a twisted connection that feels unbreakable. This bond isn't about love in the traditional sense. It's a survival mechanism, a psychological response to prolonged exposure to stress and emotional manipulation. The cycle is predictable. The abuser shows moments of tenderness, just enough to confuse the victim into thinking the abuse is a mistake. And the victim, desperate for a sense of normalcy, clings to these rare flashes of kindness. It's a constant back and forth, alternating between highs and lows, with the victim left unsure of what is real and what is not. What makes trauma bonding so powerful is the unpredictability. Abuse isn't consistent. It comes in waves, making the victim always anticipate the next moment of warmth. It's not the emotional chaos that you can see coming. It's the hope that each time the cycle begins anew, this time things will be different. This time they'll change, and that hope becomes the cage. The psychological toll is immense. When someone you love causes you pain, it shakes your sense of self. You second-guess your feelings, questioning if you're overreacting, if you're being dramatic. The manipulator thrives on this uncertainty. They know how to pull you back in, feeding you just enough emotional breadcrumbs to keep you hungry for more. This is how trauma bonding thrives, by exploiting the very human need for connection, making it feel like there's no escape. But here's the real danger. The longer the bond endures, the harder it becomes to break free. The victim starts believing the lies they've been told. You need them. They're the only one who understands you. The abuser's narrative becomes the victim's reality, and slowly, the victim loses their sense of autonomy and self-worth. Trauma bonding doesn't just affect intimate relationships. It can manifest in families, friendships, and even work environments. The same manipulative patterns apply. Whether it's a parent who alternates between love and neglect, or a boss who creates an environment of fear followed by occasional praise, the dynamics are the same. The person on the receiving end feels trapped, powerless to break free. The hardest part of breaking a trauma bond is the deep internal conflict. You feel like you should walk away, but something in you resists. You've invested so much into the relationship, so many emotions, so much of yourself. But remember this, the longer you stay, the deeper the wound becomes. Recognizing the bond for what it is, manipulation wrapped in affection, is the first step toward liberation. At the end of the day, trauma bonding is about control, not love. It's the trap that keeps you tied to a narrative that isn't yours. And the real freedom comes when you realize that the first step to healing is taking back control over your own story. Stockholm Syndrome. There's something deeply unsettling about the way some hostages form bonds with their captors. How can someone who has been abducted, tortured, or threatened end up defending or even empathizing with the very person responsible for their suffering? This bizarre psychological phenomenon is known as Stockholm Syndrome, and it's more common and more insidious than you might think. Stockholm Syndrome isn't a choice. It's a survival instinct gone awry, a twisted coping mechanism that allows the victim to deal with overwhelming fear and helplessness. The term was coined after a 1973 bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden, where hostages were taken and, upon their release, expressed feelings of loyalty and affection toward their captors. But this isn't just an odd case. It's a window into the dark recesses of the human mind, where trauma and love become indistinguishable. At its core, Stockholm Syndrome is about power dynamics. The victim is forced into an imbalanced relationship where their survival depends entirely on the captor. The victim's basic needs, food, safety, emotional reassurance, are now in the hands of the person who poses the greatest threat to their well-being. But as time passes, the victim begins to shift their perception. The captor isn't just the source of all pain, they are also the source of relief. They provide, even if the provision is sporadic and inconsistent. This cycle of fear and relief creates a paradox. The victim begins to see the captor as both an enemy and a savior. The inconsistency of the captor's behavior becomes the source of confusion, blurring the lines between love and fear. One moment, the victim is terrorized. The next, they might receive small acts of kindness, like food, comfort, or an offer of safety. These acts, while insignificant on the surface, become inflated in the victim's mind. What might have seemed like a basic human decency becomes an act of extraordinary care and affection. The victim's need for a connection becomes so desperate that they latch on to whatever scraps of attention are offered. What makes Stockholm Syndrome so dangerous is how it rewires the victim's perception of reality. The more time the victim spends with the captor, the more they begin to rationalize their actions. They start seeing the captor's cruelty as an act of necessity or even justified by the circumstances. Their survival instinct, combined with the need for connection, compels them to view their situation through a warped lens. The fear that once felt all-encompassing becomes overshadowed by a warped sense of gratitude. But here's the terrifying part. Stockholm Syndrome can persist even after the victim is free. The psychological bonds created during captivity don't just vanish when the doors are opened. Survivors of Stockholm Syndrome often find themselves struggling to break free of the emotional connection they've formed with their captor. This emotional attachment can feel more real, more powerful than the suffering they endured. Moral licensing. Ever noticed you justified a bad behavior because you did something good earlier? Maybe you donated to charity and then spent the rest of the day indulging in unhealthy habits, telling yourself, "I deserve this." That's moral licensing in action, and it's a psychological trick that can make you believe you're entitled to take a break from doing the right thing. But the truth, it's one of the most subtle and dangerous ways we deceive ourselves into making poor decisions. Moral licensing works by exploiting our natural tendency to balance our actions. When we do something morally positive, like volunteering or working hard at our job, it creates a psychological credit in our minds. We feel like we've earned the right to act in ways that are less virtuous. It's like telling yourself, "I've done enough today. Now I can afford a cheat day." Whether it's in eating, spending, or even how we treat others. This trick isn't just about making us feel better. It manipulates our sense of self-worth and entitlement. For instance, you might work out hard in the morning, but by the evening, you're more likely to justify that extra glass of wine or dessert, thinking, "I've earned this." You convince yourself that one action will counterbalance the other, giving you the moral permission to stray from your goals. But here's the unsettling part. This back and forth can slowly erode your long-term success. It's not just about personal habits either. Moral licensing impacts larger social and political behaviors. For example, a company might give a large donation to charity, but then continue harmful business practices, telling themselves the donation compensates for the damage. Or individuals might support charitable causes but harbor prejudiced beliefs, thinking that their support for one cause makes them exempt from moral responsibility in other areas. This phenomenon is so ingrained that marketers have learned to exploit it. If a brand releases a green product or makes a charitable donation, they often use this as a moral shield. They tell consumers, "Look, we've done something good. Now you can trust us with your money." They count on the fact that people feel morally licensed to ignore the flaws in the rest of their business practices because of that one good deed. It's a powerful manipulation, one that makes you more likely to forgive actions that don't align with your values. What's even more disturbing is how this moral credit builds up and becomes a justification for increasingly harmful actions. It's not just a single bad choice. It creates a pattern. The more good you do, the more you feel entitled to take moral shortcuts. In the end, these shortcuts can derail your values and decisions, and before you know it, you're completely blind to the compromises you've made along the way. And the scariest part? You might never even realize how far off track you've gone. Self-other merging. Think about the last time you really connected with someone. I mean, truly felt like you understood each other on a deeper level. You could probably recall a moment where, for a brief second, you weren't just two individuals having a conversation. You were one, sharing thoughts, emotions, and even values. This is the essence of self-other merging. It's a psychological phenomenon where the boundaries between yourself and another person blur, making you feel as though you're a part of each other's experience. Now you might be wondering, why does this matter? Here's the thing. Self-other merging is one of the most potent tools in shaping relationships and influencing behavior. Whether it's in close personal relationships or even large-scale social dynamics, the way we merge our identity with others can alter how we think, feel, and act in profound ways. And it's natural to feel a sense of connection with loved ones. This merging can also be manipulated to control or influence behavior without anyone even realizing it. Take, for example, a charismatic leader in a political movement. If they frame themselves as a true representative of the people, their followers start to see themselves in him or her. As the leader's ideas become intertwined with the followers' identities, the line between self and other fades. What the leader says is no longer just their opinion. It becomes a reflection of the collective us. In this state, followers are far more likely to adopt ideas without question and to act in ways that serve the leader's agenda, often at the cost of their own critical thinking. The leader doesn't need to force change. They simply merge their identity with the group's. Self-other merging doesn't stop in the political sphere. It plays a massive role in personal relationships too. Think about a toxic relationship where one person manipulates the other by using phrases like, "We're a team, we're in this together." While this might sound supportive, the reality is that they're subtly erasing the boundaries between what is the self and what is the other. Over time, the person being manipulated starts to internalize the manipulator's desires and goals, eroding their sense of individuality. The more this merging occurs, the harder it becomes to distinguish between your own needs and the needs of the person you're merged with. Even social media plays on this concept. Influencers who project their lifestyle in such a way that it feels personal often lead followers to merge their own identity with theirs. The more a follower feels connected to the influencer, the more likely they are to emulate their actions, choices, and even values. It's no longer just about admiring a person. It becomes about becoming that person, at least in some small way. The influencer doesn't have to ask for loyalty or sales. Once the self-other merge happens, the follower acts based on the shared identity, often unconsciously. The danger here is clear. Once you merge with someone, it becomes harder to pull back and recognize where your own thoughts and desires begin and where theirs end. It's an emotional and psychological trap that can be used for both good and bad purposes. And while it might feel great to be in sync with someone, it's essential to recognize when the merging is serving someone else's agenda rather than your own. In the end, self-other merging shows us just how fragile our sense of identity can be and how easily it can be influenced. It doesn't always require manipulation or deceit. It often happens naturally. But understanding the power of this merging allows us to take control, ensuring that our own identity remains our own, regardless of who we're connected to. Because once the merge happens, it's hard to untangle. Echoism. In a relationship, one person's voice rises above the others, while the quiet one fades into the background. They don't argue, don't express much, and often find themselves agreeing with whatever the other person says. Their opinions are never fully formed because they've been conditioned to believe their thoughts don't matter. This is echoism, an extreme form of self-sacrifice where the individual consistently suppresses their needs, desires, and voice to make room for someone else's. And the truth is, it's often a result of years of being taught that your identity is secondary to someone else's, or even worse, that it doesn't matter at all. Echoism can be traced to childhood experiences where the person was either overlooked or their emotional needs were dismissed. The world teaches them that to avoid conflict, they must remain invisible, taking a back seat to more dominant personalities. The echoist learns to adopt a life of passivity, deflecting attention from themselves in favor of the louder, often narcissistic voices around them. It's not about submission per se, but more about survival. Over time, echoism becomes a coping mechanism, a way to avoid the emotional turbulence caused by the overwhelming needs of others. The effects of echoism are devastating. In romantic relationships, one partner may constantly manipulate or overpower the other, while the echoist remains silent, avoiding confrontation and surrendering their own autonomy. A narcissist will thrive on this dynamic, their partner's silence feeding their ego while they remain comfortably in control. It's a toxic dance, where the echoist keeps their mouth shut, always seeking to please, never daring to challenge the status quo. But it's not just romantic relationships. Egoism can seep into every corner of life. In the workplace, the quiet one is often the last to be heard in meetings, even though they may have valuable contributions to make. At family gatherings, they're the ones who stand in the background, nodding along to everything that's said, afraid to speak up in case they rock the boat. Even friendships can become one-sided, with the egoist constantly giving but rarely receiving a voice in return. The danger lies in the erosion of self-worth. The more someone suppresses their own needs, the less they believe their own voice is valuable. Over time, this can lead to a complete loss of identity, where the person no longer knows who they are or what they truly want. They're just a reflection of the dominant voices around them, echoing what others say, and living a life defined by everyone except themselves. And the scariest part? The more invisible they become, the harder it is to reclaim their sense of self. Confirmation bias. You think you're making decisions based on logic, reason, and the best available evidence. But what if I told you that you're not? What if your choices, your beliefs, even your worldview are being subtly shaped by a bias you don't even realize exists? Confirmation bias is the invisible hand steering your thoughts, making sure they align with what you already believe, regardless of whether it's true or not. At its core, confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms your pre-existing beliefs while ignoring or dismissing evidence that contradicts them. It's not just a quirk of human nature, it's a psychological filter that shapes your entire perception of reality. Think about it. Have you ever Googled something just to prove you're right? We all do it. We type in a question, but we don't look at everything available. Instead, we focus on the results that support our view. Maybe it's a political stance, a health claim, or a controversial issue. We all fall into the trap of selectively searching for evidence that backs us up. And when we find it, we feel vindicated. It's proof that we were right all along. But here's where it gets insidious. Confirmation bias works on both sides of the argument. It's not just something that happens when we're wrong, it can also occur when we're right. For example, if you're convinced a certain health supplement works, you'll latch on to any article that supports that claim while dismissing studies that show the opposite. Even if those studies are more credible. Even if they've been peer-reviewed. Your mind does the heavy lifting to make sure your beliefs stay intact. This bias doesn't stop with articles or web searches. It extends to our interactions with people. Ever noticed how we tend to surround ourselves with like-minded individuals? We seek out groups, communities, and friendships that affirm our beliefs. This echo chamber effect is the breeding ground for radicalization, whether it's political, religious, or social. When your environment is filled with people who reinforce your viewpoint, it's almost impossible to see beyond that narrow lens. The consequences of confirmation bias can be devastating, particularly when it comes to decision-making. Whether it's in politics, where it fuels polarization and division, or in personal relationships, where it creates misunderstandings and conflicts, confirmation bias keeps us from seeing the whole picture. It locks us into our narrow view of the world and makes it nearly impossible to see things from another perspective. It doesn't just blind us to the truth, it makes us more resistant to it. What's more dangerous is that confirmation bias operates in the background of your mind. It's automatic. You don't have to think about it, it just happens. That's why it's so hard to recognize and even harder to combat. The mind is always looking for patterns, always searching for evidence that fits. It's almost as if our thoughts are a puzzle, and confirmation bias is the piece that fits snugly into the gaps, giving us the illusion that we've completed the picture. In the end, confirmation bias isn't just a quirky behavior. It's a fundamental part of how we interact with the world, shaping everything from our beliefs to our actions. And until you become aware of it, it will continue to shape your reality without you even noticing. Rumination. Let's start with a simple thought. What happens when you can't stop thinking about something? You replay it in your mind over and over, each time more intensely. It starts small, just a passing thought, but over time it grows into a constant loop. This is rumination, and it's a psychological trap that many people unknowingly fall into, with devastating consequences. At first, it might feel like you're just trying to make sense of a situation. You're revisiting a conversation, analyzing what went wrong, or replaying a mistake, hoping that somehow you'll find an answer. But here's the dangerous part. The more you focus on it, the worse it gets. The cycle doesn't end, it feeds on itself. The more you dwell, the more the thoughts take over, dragging you deeper into a spiral. It's like being stuck in a mental echo chamber. You're caught in a loop, endlessly cycling through the same thoughts, without ever finding a resolution. You're not moving forward. You're just retracing the same ground over and over again, getting more frustrated, more upset, and more drained each time. Why does this happen? It all comes down to our brain's attempt to solve problems. We think that if we just think harder, we'll find a solution. But rumination isn't about solving anything. It's about getting stuck in the cycle itself. And over time, it starts to take a toll on your mental health. In fact, rumination is closely linked to depression and anxiety. It creates a mental fog that clouds your ability to think clearly, leading you to interpret situations in a more negative light. You become obsessed with the problem, unable to see the bigger picture, or break free from the cycle. The longer you ruminate, the worse you feel, and the deeper you sink into the negative emotions. It doesn't stop there. Rumination also impacts your behavior. When you can't stop thinking about a situation, it affects how you interact with others and how you approach challenges. You start to see everything through the lens of the issue you're stuck on. You become hyper-focused on the negative, constantly seeking validation or reassurance, unable to let go of the thoughts that are consuming you. You see, the more you engage in rumination, the more you train your brain to keep doing it. The cycle becomes self-reinforcing. You might even start to crave it, looking for new things to ruminate on, simply because your brain is used to staying in that state. It becomes your default mode of thinking. So, how do you break free from this trap? It's not easy. The first step is recognizing when you're stuck in a rumination loop. Once you're aware of it, you can take action. Challenge those repetitive thoughts. Try to focus on the present moment rather than getting lost in past mistakes or future worries. It's about breaking the cycle and shifting your attention elsewhere. Rumination might seem harmless at first. After all, you're just thinking. But if you're not careful, it can hijack your mental well-being. It's the kind of psychological trap that sneaks up on you gradually until it becomes a constant, draining presence in your life. So the next time you find yourself stuck in that loop, remember, it's not the thinking that matters. It's the getting out. Enemy. Have you ever walked into a crowd of people and felt utterly disconnected? Maybe you felt like you were part of a system that no longer made sense, or perhaps it seemed as though the rules and norms that once guided your actions were no longer relevant. In moments like this, you're experiencing the effects of anomie, a state of normlessness, a breakdown in the social fabric that once held everything together. At its core, anomie is a sense of disconnection from society's rules and expectations. It's a term first introduced by sociologist Emile Durkheim to describe the feeling of isolation and disorientation that arises when an individual's actions no longer align with the collective norms and values. It's the moment when the world feels like it's lost its bearings, and the old systems of order seem irrelevant or impossible to follow. This phenomenon often occurs in times of rapid social change. Whether it's during periods of economic upheaval, political revolution, or technological advancement, Anomie emerges when the traditional structures that once guided behavior no longer serve their purpose. Take, for instance, the rise of the digital age. The internet has connected us in ways that were once unimaginable, but at the same time, it has fragmented our understanding of community, identity, and social belonging. In this new digital reality, what were once clear social guidelines now feel obsolete, leaving people searching for meaning in a world that doesn't seem to have it anymore. Anomie doesn't just affect individuals on a grand scale, it seeps into the smallest interactions. It can manifest as a general sense of frustration with societal expectations or a loss of motivation to contribute to the greater good. People start to feel like they're living in a world without rules, where the typical markers of success and fulfillment lose their relevance. In a society characterized by anomie, norms that once governed behaviors, honesty, respect, community, start to feel arbitrary. People begin to question, why should I follow these norms if they no longer seem to serve any purpose? One of the most insidious aspects of anomie is its subtlety. It doesn't strike with the sudden force of an external crisis, but rather it spreads like a quiet contagion. It starts small, people begin questioning the status quo, and over time, the fabric of society begins to unravel. Communities fracture as individual pursuits outweigh collective goals. Relationships lose their depth as people struggle to find common ground in a world where norms seem to be fading. But here's the catch. Anomie isn't just about loss, it's also about opportunity. When society's expectations become less rigid, individuals are given the freedom to explore new possibilities, to redefine who they are and what they value. However, this freedom often comes at a price: the risk of falling into chaos. Without shared norms to guide behavior, people can quickly become adrift, unsure of how to navigate the world around them. So how do we fight back against the creeping influence of anomie? It's not about returning to old ways, but rather about reimagining new ones, creating systems, values, and connections that bring us back together in meaningful ways. In a world of constant change, the key may lie in finding ways to adapt without losing the essence of what it means to belong. In the end, the question becomes, in a world where the rules are no longer clear, can we find a new way to define ourselves, or will we be swallowed by the silence of anomie where nothing feels grounded anymore? Imposter syndrome. It doesn't matter how much you achieve or how many accolades you collect. The fear always lingers, a quiet whisper in the back of your mind. You don't deserve this. They'll find out you're a fraud. Imposter syndrome, an overwhelming feeling that no matter what you do, you're not worthy of your success. It's a psychological trap that doesn't discriminate. Professionals, students, creatives, anyone who's ever stood in the light of accomplishment has faced this shadow. The paradox? The more successful you become, the louder that voice gets. And the more you try to silence it, the more it digs in, until the idea of being found out takes roots so deeply that it feels impossible to shake. Why does it work so well? Because humans are inherently self-critical. We are wired to doubt ourselves, to second-guess, to assume that the recognition we receive must be a fluke. We've been taught that failure is something to fear, that success must be earned. So when we find ourselves in positions of success, the brain scrambles for an explanation. It's easier to convince ourselves that our achievements are mere luck, or the result of deception, than to accept that we truly earned them. Admitting our worth would mean confronting the uncomfortable truth that we are capable of greatness, and that's terrifying. Imposter syndrome is a master manipulator, shifting our focus from genuine achievement to self-doubt. When faced with it, we start to ignore our accomplishments, attributing them to external factors rather than our skills or hard work. We fear that one mistake will expose us for the frauds we believe we are. So we overcompensate, working harder, longer, trying to prove to ourselves and others that we belong. But the harder we work, the the deeper we sink into the lie. Each new success only reinforces the belief that we're somehow deceiving the world. The truth is, imposter syndrome is less about your abilities and more about the stories we tell ourselves. It thrives on the idea that we don't deserve success, that we are somehow not good enough, no matter how much evidence to the contrary exists. The more we try to suppress it, the more power we give it. And the more we embrace the lie that we are imposters, the harder it becomes to recognize our true worth. Imposter syndrome doesn't just live in our heads, it spreads. It convinces us that others feel the same way, that we are alone in our fear. And because of that, we hide it. We wear a mask of confidence, while internally, we're paralyzed by the fear of being exposed. But here's the most insidious part. It's not about who's good enough. It's about who believes the narrative. And if we keep telling ourselves we don't belong, we'll eventually start to believe it too. Splitting. Imagine you're in a relationship and everything feels perfect. Your partner is charming, kind, and attentive. Then, one day, they forget your birthday or say something that hurts your feelings. Suddenly, the person you once adored turns into a villain in your eyes. You begin to see them as all bad, selfish, inconsiderate, manipulative. This is splitting. The psychological pattern where you view people or situations in extremes with no middle ground. Splitting works by forcing you to see things as either entirely good or completely bad, with no nuance in between. It's as though you're looking at the world through a black and white lens. One moment, someone is your hero, the next they are your enemy. This shift happens quickly and without warning, often leaving you feeling emotionally unstable. It's an all-or-nothing approach to relationships, one that can lead to intense emotional highs and devastating lows. At its core, splitting is a defense mechanism. It helps you cope with anxiety by simplifying complex emotions. When you're faced with someone who has both good and bad qualities, the tension between these opposing feelings can be overwhelming. Splitting resolves this by compartmentalizing. If someone does something you perceive as wrong, they are immediately labeled as bad, pushing out any recognition of their positive traits. This creates a distorted view of reality, where people are either saints or sinners, depending on how they behave at any given moment. The impact of splitting extends beyond romantic relationships. It can happen in friendships, family dynamics, and even at work. A friend might make an offhand comment that rubs you the wrong way, and suddenly you're questioning their loyalty. A colleague could present an idea that doesn't align with yours, and you might label them as untrustworthy or incompetent. In these moments, you abandon the ability to see complexity, opting instead for a simpler, more emotionally satisfying view. They are wrong, I am right. But splitting doesn't just distort how you see others, it also affects how you view yourself. When you split, you might see yourself as either a complete success or a total failure. Any mistake or imperfection feels catastrophic, driving you further into self-criticism. You may push away any acknowledgement of your strengths, focusing only on what you perceive as your flaws. Ultimately, splitting doesn't just harm relationships, it prevents growth. When you view people and situations in extremes, you miss the opportunity to understand and connect with the complex, messy reality of human experience. Real change and healing come from embracing the gray areas, not just categorizing everything as either perfect or broken. Narcissistic supply. Imagine walking into a room only to be met with the piercing eyes of someone who's been watching you for a while. They smile, but there's something off. They don't just want your attention, they crave your validation. They don't care about you, they care about what you can give them. This is narcissistic supply at work. At its core, narcissistic supply is the fuel that feeds a narcissist's insatiable need for admiration and adoration. It's a twisted relationship where people aren't loved, they're used as emotional batteries. The narcissist isn't looking for connection. They're looking for a constant source of power to keep their fragile ego intact. You're not a person to them. You're a provider of narcissistic supply. It begins with manipulation. The narcissist knows how to charm, how to make you feel like the center of the world. In the beginning, they can be intoxicating. They mirror your desires, your fears, your dreams. They become the perfect partner, the best friend, or the most dedicated family member. For a while, it feels real until it isn't. When you give them what they want, attention, praise, admiration, they thrive. Their confidence spikes, their ego inflates. But the moment you stop providing this fuel, their true nature reveals itself. They become distant, cold, and sometimes outright cruel. The narcissist is a master of inconsistency. One moment they shower you with affection, the next, they leave you starving for approval. The game they play is simple: keep you hooked, keep you guessing. The narcissist doesn't care about you. They don't care about your feelings, your struggles, or your well-being. They only care about themselves and how you can serve their need for validation. When you're no longer useful, you're discarded. They'll find someone else to feed their ego. This dynamic is toxic, but it's also incredibly difficult to escape. The narcissist is an emotional parasite. They feed on your self-esteem, using it to prop up their fragile self-image. When you question the relationship, they gaslight you, making you doubt your own reality. You start to believe that without them, you'll be nothing. You'll feel isolated, unsure of who you are outside their approval. In the end, you're not a partner. You're a tool. A tool to keep them feeling powerful, important, and in control. And when the supply runs out, they move on, leaving you wondering how you were ever so blind to the emotional theft. The narcissist won't hesitate to abandon you the moment they find someone else to serve their needs, leaving you feeling empty, drained, and questioning your worth. They've mastered the art of taking without giving, and once you've been drained, they'll never look back. Narcissistic supply isn't about love. It's about power. It's about manipulation. And once you've been drained, you may never fully recover. The most dangerous thing a narcissist takes isn't just your energy, it's your sense of self. Fawning response. When someone is in pain, there's often a gut instinct to comfort them. You might soften your tone, offer help, or simply be present. But for some, this instinct doesn't just kick in. It becomes an overwhelming drive to please, to avoid conflict, to be liked at all costs. This is the fawning response, a trauma response that manifests as people-pleasing behavior, and it's rooted in the need for emotional survival. The fawning response develops in childhood, often as a result of emotional abuse or neglect. A child learns that their safety, emotional or physical, depends on the approval of their caregivers. If a parent's mood swings from affection to anger, the child becomes hyper-aware of their behavior, trying to keep the peace by constantly seeking validation. It's not about expressing genuine love or care. It's about securing safety. In this environment, love is conditional. The child learns that if they can keep everyone happy, they won't be the target of anger, ridicule, or rejection. This learned behavior doesn't just disappear when childhood ends. As an adult, the person who developed this response will often go out of their way to please others, even at the expense of their own needs, desires, and boundaries. They're constantly scanning for signs of displeasure or conflict, and when they sense it, they're quick to apologize, overextend themselves, or suppress their own feelings to avoid a confrontation. This is the trauma response in full swing, navigating the world through the lens of "I must please others to survive." But here's the catch. Fawning isn't about genuine connection, it's a survival mechanism. The fawner is not seeking real validation. They are trying to avoid the emotional violence or neglect they once experienced. In toxic relationships, the fawn becomes the enabler, suppressing their own needs to meet the demands of someone else. They become a mirror of the abuser's desires, constantly adjusting, constantly accommodating. This need to please isn't just frustrating, it's draining. When someone is stuck in a fawning response, they're often unaware of their own desires. They might struggle to say no, feel guilty for taking time for themselves, or fear abandonment when they stand up for their boundaries. Over time, this can lead to burnout, emotional numbness, and an inability to form authentic relationships. The fawning response becomes a vicious cycle that leaves the person emotionally depleted and unfulfilled. The most dangerous part of fawning is that it's so often mistaken for kindness or compassion. It can be hard to distinguish someone who's genuinely giving from someone who's giving to avoid conflict. But here's the truth. The fawner isn't really giving. They're giving to survive. When the fear of rejection becomes the foundation of every action, genuine connection is impossible. So how do you break free from the fawning response? It starts with self-awareness. Recognizing the pattern is the first step. The next step is learning to say no, setting boundaries, and confronting the fear of rejection. It's about shifting from a survival mindset to a growth mindset, where your worth isn't contingent on how much you can please others, but on who you are, unapologetically, on your own. The journey to healing is long, but it begins with understanding that you deserve to be seen and loved for who you truly are, without the need to please. De-individuation. Have you ever witnessed a crowd turn into a chaotic mob? Maybe it was at a concert, a protest, or a sports event. Individuals in the crowd who would otherwise follow social norms and moral guidelines suddenly lose all sense of accountability. This isn't an accident. It's the psychological phenomenon known as de-individuation. And it's the reason why people in groups often act in ways they never would alone. Imagine you're at a concert with thousands of people, all hyped up and energized. The music, the energy, the atmosphere, it's all electric. Suddenly, someone in the crowd starts pushing others, maybe even throwing things. You'd think that most people would step back, but instead, the whole group starts to follow suit, getting caught up in the excitement and abandoning their usual sense of right and wrong. Why? Because in the anonymity of a crowd, people feel like they lose their individuality, and with it, their moral compass. De-individuation happens when individuals in a group are stripped of their personal identity. Their actions become less about personal beliefs and more about fitting in with the collective. This loss of self-awareness can make people feel less accountable for their behavior, as if they're just a part of the mob. In studies, groups of people who would normally act in socially acceptable ways become far more likely to engage in aggression, vandalism, or risky behavior simply because they're part of a larger, anonymous crowd. But it doesn't always have to be about chaos. Think about online trolling or cyberbullying. Behind a screen, people can lash out, say things they would never dream of saying face-to-face, and do so with little fear of repercussions. The absence of physical presence provides a buffer, a feeling of detachment from their actions, making it easier to engage in harmful behavior without feeling guilty. De-individuation isn't just about violence. It's about losing the internal brakes that normally guide your decisions. The more anonymous or immersed in a group you become, the less you feel like your individual actions matter. When people can't be identified, when they're just one face in the crowd, they're less likely to consider the moral consequences of their behavior. The group becomes a shield for their actions, and personal responsibility dissolves. This is why groups can be so dangerous. It's easy to forget that each individual is responsible for their own actions when they're just another face in a sea of bodies. This loss of self-awareness is what allows otherwise rational people to commit acts they would never consider alone. In groups, people don't just act differently. They become different, losing the moral compass that once guided them. And it doesn't just happen in chaotic situations. It can happen in any group setting. workplaces, social clubs, or even political movements. It's a force that takes away personal identity and lets the group mind dictate actions. That's why understanding de-individuation is key. It's not about bad people, it's about how the group can alter the way people think and behave. Delusion of control. It's easy to believe we control our destinies, that our actions and decisions directly shape the outcomes of our lives. After all, we're taught to take charge, make things happen, and believe that hard work always pays off. But what if I told you that much of what you think you control is, in fact, out of your hands entirely? Welcome to the delusion of control, a psychological trap where we convince ourselves we hold more power over situations than we actually do. Consider the classic example of a gambler. They sit at the slot machine, pushing buttons with determination as if their every move increases their chances of hitting the jackpot. The lights flash, the sound cues a win, and they believe their persistence is what's tipping the odds in their favor. But the truth? It's all random. Their actions don't change the outcome one bit. The machine is designed to ensure they lose, but they cling to the illusion that their involvement makes a difference. This sense of control doesn't just appear in casinos, it invades everyday life. For example, think about someone who obsessively checks their email or refreshes their social media, convinced that staying connected will somehow change the outcome of a situation. Whether it's a job offer, a personal relationship, or an investment, they feel if they just engage enough, the universe will align to their advantage. But in reality, no amount of checking, refreshing, or worrying changes anything. These are actions born out of the delusion of control, a mental trap that makes us feel secure even when the outcome is determined by factors completely outside our influence. The delusion of control doesn't always manifest in harmless ways. It can lead to dangerous behavior, like when people persist in risky investments, convinced their decisions will pay off, or when they continue unhealthy relationships, thinking they can fix them with enough effort. This is how self-destructive patterns are reinforced. By believing that more effort equals more control, we ignore the reality that external forces often govern the situation. This delusion becomes even more powerful when we're in high-stakes environments, like the workplace or politics. We think that our networking, strategic positioning, or aggressive decision-making will guarantee success, yet many outcomes are influenced by uncontrollable factors like timing, luck, or other people's decisions. In these cases, the belief in control keeps us pushing forward, often to our detriment, ignoring the reality that we can't always dictate the results. So, how do you break free from the delusion? It starts with recognizing that some things are beyond your control, and that's okay. Accepting that you can't control everything allows you to focus on the areas where you can make a real impact, instead of wasting energy on situations where you never had control to begin with. The key is understanding the limits of your influence and using your efforts where they truly matter. In the end, the most liberating realization isn't that you can control everything. It's that you never needed to. Unconscious bias. You might think you're not prejudiced. You might believe that your judgments are always fair and objective. But here's the truth. We all have unconscious biases, hidden prejudices that influence our decisions and perceptions without us even realizing it. They're not always malicious, but they're there, and they shape the way we see the world. Unconscious bias works like a silent filter in our brains. You can see it in action every time you interact with someone, whether you realize it or not. Let's say you're interviewing candidates for a job. One candidate walks in, and something about their appearance or background immediately triggers a feeling. Maybe it's a subconscious association from past experiences. Without realizing it, that subtle impression can influence your decision, even if you're trying to be objective. You might hire someone you're comfortable with, even though another candidate is more qualified on paper. The danger of unconscious bias isn't just that it affects your decisions, it's that it does so without you noticing. It's like wearing tinted glasses that color everything you see, but you don't even realize they're on your face. In society, this bias has deep roots. From the workplace to politics to everyday social interactions, unconscious biases are woven into our institutions. They dictate who gets hired, who gets promoted, who gets elected, and even who gets noticed in a crowd. And the worst part? These biases aren't always easy to spot. For instance, think about how often we associate leadership with traits like assertiveness and confidence. But where did that association come from? Why do we think of those traits as leader-like in the first place? It's because of unconscious biases ingrained in society. As a result, we may overlook people who don't exhibit those traits, without realizing that they may actually be the best candidate for the role. Unconscious bias doesn't stop at professional settings. It also affects how we form relationships and how we judge people in our personal lives. Think about how you interact with strangers. Maybe you cross the street when you see a group of young men walking toward you. Not because you consciously fear them, but because your mind has been trained to associate certain traits with danger. Your brain is operating on a bias you didn't ask for, and you didn't even know you had. The real power of unconscious bias lies in how it reinforces stereotypes. The more we unconsciously associate people with certain traits, the more those associations become self-perpetuating. This isn't just about bigotry in the traditional sense. It's about how we act based on automatic, unexamined beliefs that shape our entire social reality. So what can we do about it? First, we have to acknowledge that we all carry biases, and the real work begins when we recognize them. We have to become mindful of our actions and decisions, challenge our automatic thoughts, and make space for diverse perspectives. Only then can we start to dismantle the biases that hold us back and stop them from influencing us in ways we never intended. Locus of control. Imagine you're facing a difficult challenge. Maybe it's a tough exam, a job interview, or a tough situation in your personal life. How you view the source of your success or failure will shape how you approach it. This is where the concept of the locus of control comes in. Simply put, it's the way people perceive where control over their lives comes from, within themselves, internal locus of control, or from external forces, external locus of control. Now, let's break it down. Someone with an internal locus of control believes that their actions, decisions, and abilities are what shape their life outcomes. They think, if I work hard enough, I can change my circumstances. This mindset empowers them to take charge of their own destiny, to believe that their effort directly influences what happens. It's a mindset that thrives on personal responsibility, and in many ways, it can be incredibly motivating. When things go wrong, they'll typically think, what could I have done better? And focus on improving themselves. When things go right, they'll attribute their success to their own effort and skills. On the flip side, someone with an external locus of control views life events as being largely out of their hands. They may believe that luck, fate, or the actions of others determine their outcomes. It's not up to me, it's the economy, they might think, or I can't help that I wasn't born into the right family. For people with an external locus, success and failure feel like they are determined by external forces, whether it's the weather, the government, or other people's opinions. While this might sound passive, it also means that these individuals may feel powerless to change their situations, often leading to a sense of helplessness or resignation when things go wrong. Locus of control doesn't just impact our motivation or outlook on life. It's also a psychological mechanism that deeply affects our mental health and well-being. People with an internal locus of control often feel more empowered, resilient, and proactive because they believe they can shape their futures. This can lead to lower levels of stress and better coping strategies when life gets tough. On the other hand, individuals with an external locus might experience more anxiety and frustration because they feel like their lives are at the mercy of forces beyond their control. Interestingly, our locus of control isn't fixed. It can change over time, shaped by our experiences, upbringing, and environment. Someone who grows up feeling unsupported or out of control might develop a more external locus, but over time, with the right support and mindset, they can shift to an internal one. It's not about the world around you. It's about how you choose to perceive it. In the end, the locus of control is more than just a concept. It's a lens through which we see and engage with the world. Whether you're feeling in charge or overwhelmed, it all starts with how you view the source of control in your life. When you believe you have the power to change, you'll find that you have more control than you think. The halo effect. You meet someone for the first time, and they greet you with a warm smile. Instantly, you feel a sense of comfort and trust. You start thinking, wow, they must be a really nice person. You've made that judgment based on just one trait, their smile. This is the halo effect, a psychological bias where our overall impression of a person is influenced by one positive characteristic. It's like seeing someone through rose-colored glasses, where a single good trait shapes how we view the rest of their personality or abilities. The halo effect works both ways. If someone is attractive, we might assume they're also intelligent, friendly, or capable. This is why you've probably seen people elevate attractive candidates during job interviews, even though they haven't seen the full picture of their skills. It's not necessarily that the person is more qualified, it's just that their looks are making us view them more positively across the board. It's a bias that's hard to shake, and it's something that affects how we perceive almost everything from people to products to companies. Here's another example. Think about a celebrity. Perhaps you adore their performance in a movie. As a result, you start to like everything about them. How they dress, the way they speak, even their opinions on politics. The halo effect leads you to assume that if they're great in one area, they must be great in others too. It's an automatic, subconscious leap of logic, and it happens all the time without us realizing it. But the halo effect isn't just about positive traits. It works with negative impressions too. If someone comes across as rude or arrogant, we're more likely to assume that other aspects of their character are just as unappealing. This is known as the reverse halo effect, or Horn's effect. It's where a single negative trait clouds our judgment of the rest of the person, making us see them in a much worse light than they may actually deserve. Now, why does this happen? The halo effect is a shortcut our brains take to make sense of the world quickly. It's easier to generalize and apply one trait to everything we know about a person, rather than making nuanced judgments. But while this can make life easier in the short run, it can also be incredibly misleading. Think about it. If we only judge people, products, or situations based on a single characteristic, we're missing out on the full picture. The halo effect tricks us into believing we know more than we do. It's a cognitive bias that shapes our decisions, sometimes leading us to make judgments that are based more on our impressions than on the reality of the situation. In the end, the halo effect is more than just a quirky quirk of the mind. It's a lens that distorts the way we see the world, reminding us that we should always take a step back and question whether one trait should really define everything we know. Social loafing. Ever worked on a group project? Everyone seems to be chipping in, but there's that one person who's barely contributing, sitting back, letting others do the heavy lifting. It's frustrating, right? You're carrying more than your fair share, and it feels like they're taking advantage of the group effort. This phenomenon is called social loafing, and it's something that happens more often than we'd like to admit. Social loafing is the tendency for individuals to put in less effort when they're working in a group compared to when they're working alone. The idea is simple. When you're in a group, you might feel like your individual effort won't make much of a difference, so you hold back, letting others do the work. In turn, others may also loaf, assuming that the group effort will carry the weight. It's a vicious cycle that can lead to frustration and a lack of productivity. Here's a classic example. In a study by researchers in the 1970s, participants were asked to pull a rope as hard as they could, either alone or in groups. When working alone, people pulled with maximum effort, but when in groups, they pulled less forcefully. Why? They knew that the more people there were, the less responsibility they would feel for the outcome. This is social loafing in action. People exerting less effort because they know others are also contributing. The concept of social loafing doesn't just apply to simple tasks like rope pulling. It's common in workplaces, classrooms, or even casual group settings. One of the most significant factors that contribute to social loafing is the diffusion of responsibility. When a task is assigned to a group, no single person feels solely responsible for its success or failure. It's easier to slink into the background and let the group handle it. Another important factor is the size of the group. The larger the group, the more likely social loafing is to occur. Why? The bigger the team, the less noticeable it is when someone holds back. People tend to feel less accountable when there are more people around to share the responsibility. So, how can you combat social loafing? First, make sure that every group member knows their individual responsibilities. Clear roles and expectations can reduce the likelihood of loafing. Also, create a sense of accountability by regularly checking in on progress and encouraging communication. It's also helpful to make sure that the work is meaningful and that group members are motivated to contribute. At the end of the day, group projects are about collaboration and shared effort. When everyone pulls their weight, the outcome is usually better and far more rewarding. Hindsight bias. We've all been there. You're watching a game, a competition, or even a news story unfold, and when it's over, you think, I knew that was going to happen. It's a familiar feeling, as if the outcome was inevitable and you had predicted it all along. But did you really? What's happening here is called hindsight bias, and it's a sneaky little trick our brains play on us, one that can distort our memories and perceptions of past events. Hindsight bias is the tendency to see events as having been predictable after they have already occurred. It's the feeling that, once you know the outcome, you somehow knew it all along. This bias is often referred to as the "I knew it all along" effect, because it makes us believe we foresaw the result, even when we didn't have enough information to make that prediction at the time. Take, for example, a historical event like the 2008 financial crisis. After the dust settled, many people looked back and claimed that they saw the warning signs all along. The problem is, before it happened, very few people were actively predicting it. The events that led to the crash seemed unpredictable at the time, but once the outcome became clear, people quickly reconstructed their memories to make it appear as though the signs were obvious. In hindsight, it's easy to think, well, of course, the housing bubble was going to burst. This bias can even affect how we view our own decisions. Imagine you choose a restaurant for dinner, and it ends up being a great choice. Later, you might tell yourself, I knew that restaurant was going to be good. But in reality, you had no way of knowing. You made a decision based on available information, but once the outcome was positive, your brain convinces you that you were always certain it would turn out that way. One of the most interesting aspects of hindsight bias is that it's not just about reflecting on personal experiences. It extends to how we perceive the outcomes of others' actions, whether in business, politics, or sports. Take the stock market, for instance. After a significant crash or a huge rise in stock prices, people often act as though they had predicted the outcome, even if their predictions were nothing more than guesses before the event occurred. But why does hindsight bias happen? There are a few psychological mechanisms at play. For one, we have a natural desire to make sense of the world around us. When we know the outcome, it's easier to connect the dots and create a narrative that seems logical and inevitable. This is a way our brain tries to maintain a sense of control over an uncertain world. Another reason is that our memory isn't a perfect recording device. It's flexible. When we know what happened, our brain retroactively adjusts our recollection of events, making it seem like we always understood the outcome. So how can you avoid falling into the trap of hindsight bias? The first step is recognizing it when it happens. If you find yourself saying, "I knew that was going to happen," take a moment to step back and question whether you truly foresaw the outcome or if your brain is simply retroactively filling in the gaps. It's also important to acknowledge the uncertainty that often surrounds complex events. No outcome is truly inevitable until it happens. In the end, hindsight bias doesn't just affect our memories. It shapes our perceptions of reality. It tricks us into thinking we have more control over the past than we really do. The next time you find yourself feeling certain about something that has already occurred, ask yourself, was it truly predictable, or are you just seeing the world through the lens of hindsight? FOMO, fear of missing out. Have you ever scrolled through your social media feed only to be hit with the overwhelming feeling that everyone else is living their best life while you're left out? Whether it's the perfect vacation photos, exciting social events, or career milestones, you might find yourself thinking, why wasn't I invited? Why didn't I think of that? This feeling is what we call FOMO, or the fear of missing out. And it's becoming an increasingly common experience in today's hyper-connected world. FOMO is a psychological phenomenon where individuals experience anxiety or discomfort about missing out on an exciting or rewarding event or opportunity. It's not just about being left out of social gatherings, though. FOMO can apply to anything that makes you feel like you're not part of something cool, innovative, or meaningful. It's the desire to be in the loop, to be included, to keep up with the trends, and to make sure you're not falling behind. Why does FOMO affect us so deeply? For starters, it taps into a primal need for social connection and belonging. As humans, we have evolved to thrive in social groups, and being excluded from those groups, whether physically or emotionally, can trigger a sense of isolation and rejection. In the past, being left out of the group could mean a loss of safety or resources. While modern society doesn't operate quite like that, our brains are still wired to feel threatened when we're not part of the in-group. But FOMO doesn't just stem from a basic need to fit in. Social media platforms, particularly Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, play a huge role in magnifying this fear. They constantly show us curated glimpses into other people's seemingly perfect lives. Whether it's an influencer's luxurious vacation, a friend's engagement announcement, or a colleague's promotion, these images can make us feel like we're missing out on something bigger and better than our own reality. The more we see others enjoying these experiences, the more we feel like we're falling behind. One of the most dangerous aspects of FOMO is that it can lead to a cycle of unhealthy comparison. We start to measure our own lives against what we see online, and more often than not, come up feeling inadequate. It can cause us to make hasty decisions just to keep up with others, whether it's booking an impromptu vacation, buying something we can't afford, or attending events that don't truly interest us. The pressure to constantly be on the go and make exciting memories can leave us feeling drained and unfulfilled, as we're chasing experiences that don't necessarily align with our true desires. FOMO can also affect our mental health. Studies show that people with higher levels of FOMO are more likely to experience feelings of anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. The constant need for validation and the fear of being left behind can make us feel unworthy or disconnected from others. In some cases, it can lead to decision fatigue, where we're overwhelmed by choices and unable to focus on what genuinely brings us joy. So how do we deal with FOMO? The first step is to recognize that it's natural to feel left out from time to time, but it doesn't have to control your life. Focus on what truly matters to you, not what you think you should be doing to meet other people's expectations. Instead of comparing your life to the highlight reels on social media, try to cultivate gratitude for your own unique experiences and accomplishments. Mindfulness practices can help you stay grounded in the present, reminding you that your own life is just as meaningful as anyone else's. Foot in the door technique. Have you ever been asked to do something small, only to find yourself agreeing to something much bigger later on? It feels like you're just going along with things, right? But what if I told you that this is a psychological trick that's been used for decades to get people to say yes to things they otherwise might have rejected? This is called the foot in the door technique, and it's surprisingly effective. Let's break it down. Imagine someone knocks on your door and asks if they can put a small sign in your yard to support a local charity. You think, it's just a sign, it's no big deal, and you agree. A few weeks later, they come back, this time asking if you would host a fundraiser at your house for the same charity. You might hesitate, but because you agreed to that small favor earlier, you're more likely to say yes to the bigger request. The foot in the door technique works by starting with a small, easy request to get your foot in the door, and then following it up with a larger, less reasonable one. The small request creates a psychological commitment, making it harder for you to refuse the bigger one. Why does this happen? It's rooted in our need for consistency. Once we make a commitment, even a small one, we tend to rationalize that decision and justify it to ourselves. The brain wants to maintain consistency in behavior, so when we say yes to something minor, it makes us more likely to agree to something bigger later on. This is especially true when the initial request feels harmless or inconsequential. A classic real-world example? The 1966 study by psychologists Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser. They asked homeowners to display a small, simple sign in their window promoting safe driving. After they agreed, a week later, these same homeowners were much more likely to agree to place a much larger, more intrusive billboard sign on their lawn. The small commitment made the larger one feel more acceptable. Now, this technique isn't just for charities or salespeople. It's often used in advertising, politics, and even in social influence. Have you ever been asked to try a product with a free sample, only to end up buying the product later? That's the foot in the door technique in action. It's how subscription services get you to sign up for a free trial, only to have you locked into a long-term commitment once you've experienced their service. But it doesn't stop there. The foot in the door technique is also used in more manipulative contexts, such as with cults or high-pressure sales tactics. These groups start by asking you for small favors, like signing a petition or attending a brief meeting. Gradually, they build trust and increase their demands until you're fully committed to their cause or product. Spotlight effect. Oftentimes you walk into a room and suddenly feel self-conscious. You think everyone is staring at you. Maybe you spilled coffee on your shirt, or you're wearing a new outfit, and you feel like the entire room is focused on your every move. In reality, though, it's highly unlikely that anyone is paying that much attention to you. This phenomenon is called the spotlight effect, and it's a powerful psychological bias that leads us to overestimate how much people notice our actions, appearance, or mistakes. At its core, the spotlight effect is our tendency to believe that we are the center of attention, even when we aren't. It's as though we imagine a spotlight is shining directly on us, illuminating every flaw or awkward moment. This bias is most commonly triggered when we feel out of place or uncertain about how others perceive us. It can happen in social situations, at work, or even while we're engaging with others online. The spotlight effect is rooted in our innate desire to be accepted and avoid judgment. Human beings are highly social creatures, and much of our behavior is shaped by how we think others see us. This constant self-awareness can lead to a distorted view of reality. In a study conducted by researchers at Princeton University, participants were asked to wear a T-shirt with a picture of Barry Manilow on it. The participants were then asked to estimate how many people noticed the shirt. On average, participants thought that about 50% of people had noticed. In reality, only around 25% had. The participants were overestimating the degree to which others were paying attention to them. So why does the spotlight effect happen? It's partly because we're naturally inclined to focus on ourselves. When we're in a situation where we feel vulnerable, like walking into a room full of strangers or giving a presentation, our minds tend to magnify our own actions, making us believe that others are noticing every little detail. We also tend to underestimate the level of self-absorption of other people. In reality, most people are far more concerned with their own lives than they are with judging yours. The spotlight effect isn't just limited to minor social awkwardness or physical appearances. It can also affect our performance in professional or academic settings. For example, if you make a small mistake during a meeting or a presentation, you might think that everyone noticed and is judging you. In reality, most people likely didn't even register the mistake, or if they did, they likely forgot about it almost immediately. So how can you overcome the spotlight effect? The key is to shift your focus away from yourself and towards others. Instead of worrying about how others perceive you, remind yourself that most people are wrapped up in their own thoughts, insecurities, and concerns. Practicing mindfulness and reminding yourself that you're not as noticeable as you think can help ease your anxiety and improve your self-confidence.